In the final days of January 1959, beneath a sky heavy with snow and silence, 10 young Soviet hikers gathered at the edge of the northern Ural Mountains. Idealistic, trained, and eager to conquer the unforgiving wilderness that stretched before them. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, seasoned by previous expeditions, bonded by camaraderie and the spirit of Soviet exploration. At their center stood Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, calm, capable, and chosen by his peers to lead this journey into the remote Kholat Syakhala Mansi, name meaning Dead Mountain, a place already steeped in local unease. Their goal was ambitious: to reach Otorten Mountain, a peak over 1,200 meters high, and earn the highest classification for a student trek candidate Master of Sports in tourism. They carried maps, skis, food for weeks, and the quiet confidence of those who believed nature, however harsh, could be understood, respected, and mastered. By January 31st, they'd established base camp near the Auspia River, then pushed deeper into the mountains. On February 1st, they began their final ascent toward the mountain pass that would later bear Dyatlov's name. That same day, Yuri Yudin, the youngest of the group, turned back-stricken with severe rheumatism, his joints swollen and aching in the cold. He would be the only one to survive. The remaining 9 Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Rustem Slobodin, Nikolai Thibaut Brignol, Alexander Zolotaryov, Yuri Krivonishenko, and Yuri Doroshenko continued upward, unaware that they were walking into a mystery that would echo for generations. Weeks passed with no word. Back in Sverdlovsk now, Yekaterinburg, friends grew uneasy. When the group failed to return by mid-February, a search operation was launched. Planes scoured the white expanse. Volunteers combed frozen valleys. Then, on February 26th, searchers spotted something unnatural on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. A tent, half buried in snow, its fabric slashed open from the inside. What they found inside defied logic. The tent was intact, stocked with boots, clothes, food, even diaries and cameras, but abandoned in haste. Footprints led away from the tear, down the mountain, barefoot prints, in temperatures plunging below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Over the following weeks, the bodies were discovered in stages. First, near a cluster of cedar trees nearly 2 kilometers from camp. Krivonishenko, Doroshenko, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin partially clothed, some in socks or underwear, one barefoot. They showed signs of hypothermia, but no struggle, no signs of animal attack. Then, deeper into a ravine, under 4 meters of snow, the remaining 4. Zolotaryov, Dubinina, Thibaut Brignol, and Kolevatov. These bodies bore injuries unlike any seen in typical mountain fatalities. Thibaut Brignol's skull was fractured with force comparable to a car crash. Dubinina's chest was crushed with such violence that her ribs shattered inward, yet her skin showed no bruising, no external trauma. Her tongue was missing, not torn away, but cleanly removed, likely by decomposition in the running water where her body lay. The Soviet authorities launched an immediate investigation. Forensic experts, military personnel, and state prosecutors descended on the site. Autopsies were conducted in secret. Radiation traces were found on some clothing minute, but unexplained. The case file swelled with contradictions. How could experienced hikers flee their shelter in the dead of night, half-dressed, into lethal cold? Why cut through the tent from the inside, not the safer entrance? What force could inflict massive internal trauma without breaking the skin? By May 1959, the investigation was abruptly closed. The official conclusion cited a compelling natural force as the cause of death, a phrase so vague it bordered on the mystical. All files were classified. Families were told not to ask questions. The hikers were quietly buried in Zayeltsovskoye Cemetery in Yekaterinburg, their graves marked with identical headstones bearing the same date of death. February 2nd, 1959. For decades, the truth remained locked behind Soviet secrecy. But whispers persisted. In the 1970s, hikers reported strange orange spheres glowing in the sky over the Urals. In the 1990s, declassified documents hinted at secret weapons tests in the region, possibly involving infrasound or parachute mines. Some theorized an avalanche, though the slope was too gentle and no snow slab was found. Others spoke of the Mansi people's warnings of spirits guarding the mountain. Then, in 2019, 60 years after the tragedy, Russian authorities reopened the case. New forensic models suggested a rare slab avalanche, a delayed collapse of wind-packed snow that might have startled the group into panicked flight. Yet critics pointed out, no avalanche debris was documented in 1959. The tent showed no signs of snow impact, and the injuries still defied conventional explanation. The moral weight of Dyatlov Pass lingers not just in the unanswered questions, but in the silence that followed. These were not dissidents or spies. They were loyal Soviet citizens, proud of their country, pursuing knowledge and adventure. And yet, when they died in terror and confusion, the state chose concealment over clarity. Their families were denied closure. Their legacy was reduced to conspiracy and folklore. Today, the mountain remains. Wind sweeps across Kholat Syakhl, erasing footprints, muffling echoes. But the story endures not because of aliens or monsters, but because it speaks to a deeper human fear. The terror of the unknown, the fragility of control, and the haunting possibility that sometimes, even in a world of science and order, nature or something beyond it can strike without warning, without reason, and without mercy. In the decades that followed, the Dyatlov Pass incident became more than a tragedy. It became a mirror, a reflection of how societies grapple with uncertainty, especially when official narratives fracture under the weight of contradiction. In the Soviet Union, where truth was often curated by the state, the silence surrounding the hikers' deaths bred fertile ground for speculation. Yet even after the USSR collapsed and archives cracked open like thawing permafrost, the core enigma remained stubbornly intact. By the early 2000s, amateur investigators, retired scientists, and descendants of the victims began reassembling the fragments. They pored over faded photographs, reconstructed timelines from diary entries, and retraced the group's route with GPS and thermal imaging. One detail haunted them all: the final photograph taken before the disaster. Developed from a camera found in the tent, it shows the group smiling near a campfire on February 1st, exhausted but cheerful, unaware that within hours, everything would unravel. The film had advanced 9 frames after that image. But those frames were never exposed. The camera was never used again. Then there were the clothes. In 2019, researchers at the Russian Academy of Sciences re-examined fabric samples from the victims' garments. They confirmed elevated levels of beta radiation, specifically on Dubinina's trousers and Krivonishenko's sweater. Not enough to cause acute radiation sickness, but anomalous nonetheless. Some speculated the hikers had passed near a secret nuclear facility. Others suggested contamination from a downed satellite or experimental drone. But no Soviet military installation existed within 150 kilometers of the site, and declassified Cold War logs show no known tests in the area during that window. The avalanche theory, revived with vigor in the 2010s, gained traction when Swiss researchers published a 2021 study modelling how a delayed slab avalanche could occur on a 23-degree slope, steeper than previously assumed due to wind loading. According to their simulation, a cornice collapse higher on the ridge could have triggered a snow slab that struck the tent hours after the group went to sleep, explaining the delayed panic. The hikers, disoriented and fearing burial, might have slashed their way out from within to escape suffocation. Once outside, hypothermia would set in within minutes. The bizarre injuries? Possibly sustained later, as some stumbled into a ravine and were struck by falling ice or debris during a secondary snowslide. But critics remained unconvinced. Yuri Kuntsevich, head of the Dyatlov Foundation, and a man who attended the original funerals as a teenager, pointed out that none of the footprints showed signs of running or dragging, suggesting the first 5 victims walked calmly to the cedar tree, perhaps hoping to build a fire. And why would trained mountaineers abandon their shelter without boots, gloves, or coats in 30-degree weather? Even in panic, instinct should have dictated otherwise. Then there is the testimony of the Mansi hunters. Indigenous to the region, they avoided Kolachiakal long before 1959, calling it the Mountain of the Dead, not out of superstition, but because of its treacherous microclimate, sudden katabatic winds, invisible crevasses, and snow that could shift without warning. Some elders later claimed they saw strange lights in the sky that night, pulsing and silent, hovering over the ridge. Soviet authorities dismissed them as folklore, but in 1959, the US and USSR were locked in a race not just for space, but for atmospheric dominance testing high-altitude rockets, ionospheric heaters, and even early directed energy weapons. Could the hikers have stumbled into a classified experiment gone wrong? The ethical dilemma at the heart of Dyatlov Pass is not merely about what happened, but about what was allowed to remain hidden. The Soviet state prioritized stability over truth, secrecy over solace. Families were denied access to full autopsy reports. Witnesses were discouraged from speaking. Evidence vanished into classified vaults. This erasure transformed a mountaineering accident into a national ghost story, one that continues to haunt because it represents a deeper betrayal. The moment when a government chooses control over compassion. Yet the hikers themselves left behind a different legacy. Their diaries reveal not fear, but joy, a deep love for the mountains, for each other, for the simple act of moving through wild spaces under open skies. Zina Kolmogorova, the group's meticulous chronicler, wrote on January 31st, "The weather is worsening, but our spirits are high. We are strong." Alexander Zolotaryov, the oldest at 37 and a veteran of World War II, carried a mandolin and taught the others folk songs around the fire. They were not reckless, they were rigorous. They checked compass bearings, rationed food, and rotated watch duties. Their mistake, if it was a mistake, was trusting that the rules of nature, once learned, would hold. In 2020, Russia's investigative committee officially closed the case again, reaffirming the avalanche hypothesis as the only plausible explanation. But even as officials declared the matter settled, a quiet pilgrimage continues. Every winter, hikers from around the world trek to Dyatlov Pass. They leave notes, candles, and small tokens at the memorial cairn erected near the tent site. Some come seeking answers, others come to bear witness. Because in the end, The true power of this story lies not in UFOs or secret weapons, but in its stark human vulnerability. 9 people, skilled and prepared, stepped into a white void and vanished into a riddle that defies resolution. Their deaths remind us that even in an age of satellites and supercomputers, there remain places where logic falters, where the wind carries more questions than answers, and where the line between natural and unnatural blurs into something we still cannot name. And so the mountain keeps its secret, not because it refuses to speak, but because perhaps some truths are too vast, too strange for any single explanation to contain. In the quiet aftermath of each new theory, one fact remains unshaken. The hikers did not die alone in their suffering. They died in fragments, scattered across time and terrain, their final moments fractured like the ice that covered them. The first 5 reached the cedar tree together, evidence suggests, and tried to build a fire. Charred branches, torn strips of clothing used as tinder, and the positioning of their bodies imply coordination, not chaos. They were not fleeing blindly, they were attempting survival. Yet something prevented them from returning to the tent, just 2,500 meters uphill. Was the slope too steep in the dark? Was the tent already buried? Or had they seen something that made going back unthinkable? The 4 found later in the ravine tell a different story, one of desperation compounded by injury. Dubinina's body, discovered under layers of snow months later, showed signs she may have been alive longer than the others. Her lungs contained fine snow, indicating she breathed after the initial exposure. And her missing tongue. Forensic pathologists now agree it was likely lost post-mortem, washed away by the meltwater that pooled in the ravine as spring approached. But the force that crushed her chest, that remains a medical anomaly. Modern biomechanics suggests such trauma would require a pressure of over a ton equivalent to a car rolling over a person, but without skin abrasions, without broken bones on the surface. It is as if an invisible hand had squeezed her from within. Then there is the matter of light. Multiple witnesses in nearby villages, railway workers, geologists, even a military dispatcher at Ivdel Air Base reported unusual luminous phenomena in the sky on the night of February 1st to 1959. Descriptions varied. Glowing orbs, silent fireballs, pulsing columns of light. At the time, these were dismissed as auroras or meteors. But the aurora borealis is rare this far south in winter, and no meteor showers were recorded. Decades later, declassified US intelligence documents revealed that both superpowers were experimenting with high-altitude ionospheric reflection, using radio waves to bounce signals over the horizon, sometimes creating artificial glows. Could the hikers have been near a test zone? Possibly. But no Soviet project of that scale was documented in the Urals during that period. What lingers most, however, is not the physics of their deaths, but the psychology of their flight. Why cut through the tent from the inside, where the snow was deepest and escape most difficult? Climbers are trained to exit from the downhill side, where the entrance is usually positioned for safety. But the tier was on the uphill side, facing the wind, the coldest exposure. This suggests panic so profound it overrode training. Something startled them awake, something that made staying in the tent feel more dangerous than stepping into 30°C darkness barefoot. Some researchers now propose a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, a late-stage hypothermia effect where victims, disoriented and overheated by failing thermoregulation, remove their clothes. But this typically occurs after prolonged exposure, not within minutes of leaving shelter. And it doesn't explain why they left boots behind, or why some wore each other's jackets, mismatched and inside out. In 2023, a team from Ural Federal University used drone LiDAR mapping to reconstruct the slope with centimetre precision. Their model confirmed that wind patterns on Kholat Syakhl can create localised snow tsunamis, dense, fast-moving drifts that behave like liquid. If such a wave struck the tent while the group slept, it could have muffled sound, blocked exits, and created a suffocating pressure that felt like an invisible wall pressing in. In that moment, slashing upward through the tent roof, the only direction not buried, might have seemed the only escape. Yet, even this theory leaves gaps. Why did no one return for gear once they reached the tree? Why did Dyatlov, the leader, die with his hands clenched around a piece of torn tent fabric, as if still trying to understand what had torn their world apart? The human cost of Dyatlov Pass extends beyond the 9 graves. Yuri Yudin, the survivor, carried guilt for the rest of his life. "If I had stayed," he told interviewers decades later, "maybe I could have helped. Maybe I would have died too, but at least I wouldn't be alone with the silence." He spent his later years advocating for transparency, collecting testimonies, and visiting the pass every year until his death in 2013. His ashes were scattered near the memorial cairn, and the family's mothers, fathers, siblings were left with state-issued condolences and sealed files. Zina Kolmogorova's mother kept her daughter's diary on her nightstand until the day she died, rereading the last entry again and again, searching for a clue hidden in the mundane. "We made good progress. The snow is deep, but the sky is clear." Today, the site is no longer forbidden. Tourists hike the route, guided by GPS waypoints and online forums. Some leave offerings: a glove, a compass, a note that reads simply, "We remember." The Russian government has installed a small museum in Yekaterinburg displaying recovered artifacts, the camera, the mandolin, a single red woolen hat found near the cedar. But the central display remains empty. A glass case labelled "The Unknown Force." Perhaps that is the most honest exhibit of all. For in the end, the Dyatlov Pass incident endures not because it defies science, but because it humbles it. It reminds us that knowledge has limits, that nature operates on scales we cannot always perceive, and that sometimes the most rational people are undone by the least rational moments. And so the wind still howls across Kholat Syakhl, carrying snow, silence, and the faint echo of footsteps that never made it back. The mystery has also seeped into the cultural bloodstream inspiring novels, films, podcasts, and even video games. In Russia, the phrase Dyatlov Pass evokes more than a location. It conjures a state of mind, a collision between order and chaos, between the known world and the inexplicable void just beyond its edge. Yet amid the dramatizations, the real story remains profoundly human. 9 individuals who trusted their skills, their equipment, and each other, only to confront something that rendered all of it meaningless in an instant. What makes their fate so unsettling is not the violence, but the absence of a clear antagonist. There is no villain to blame, no murderer, no saboteur, no invading force. The enemy, if there was one, was formless, a force that left no weapon, no motive, no trace beyond its effects. In a century defined by ideological battles and human-made catastrophes, Dyatlov Pass stands apart precisely because it resists human attribution. It is nature or physics, or chance stripped of narrative convenience. And yet, the search for meaning persists. In 2024, a joint Russian-Norwegian team proposed a new hypothesis: infrasound resonance. They suggested that wind passing over the mountain's unique topography could have generated low-frequency sound waves below 20 Hz inaudible to humans, but capable of inducing panic, nausea, and disorientation. Such waves have been documented near mountains like Mount Fuji and the Rockies, sometimes causing climbers to flee for no apparent reason. If a sudden gust triggered a resonant frequency inside the tent that night, it might have created a wave of primal terror, enough to make rational people act irrationally, to bolt into the cold without thinking. The theory is compelling, but unprovable. Like so much of Dyatlov, it fits the facts without closing the case. And perhaps that is as it should be. For to solve the mystery completely would be to rob it of its power. The power to remind us that not every question has an answer, and not every tragedy has a lesson. Sometimes there is only the snow, the silence, and the weight of what we cannot know. Still, the hiker's legacy endures in quieter ways. The Ural Mountaineering Club still awards the Dyatlov Route certification to those who complete the trek with proper preparation and respect. Their diaries are studied in survival courses, not for what went wrong, but for how well they documented conditions, shared duties, and maintained morale until the very end. Even in death they teach. And on clear winter nights, when the aurora occasionally flickers over the Urals' rare, but not impossible locals say, the mountain seems to hold its breath, as if waiting. Not for rescue, not for revelation, but for the moment when the last witness falls silent, and the story finally belongs to the wind. But that moment has not come, because as long as someone asks, what really happened? As long as a student reads Zena's last entry, or a scientist models snow dynamics on a 23-degree slope, or a pilgrim places a stone on the cairn, the 9 are not forgotten. They remain, not as victims of a conspiracy, but as symbols of human courage in the face of the incomprehensible. They walked into the white unknown with skis on their shoulders and songs in their hearts. And though they never returned, their journey continues in every unanswered question, in every theory tested, in every soul who dares to look into the abyss and wonder if it looked back. For now, the files may be closed, the theories debated, the mountain silent. But the truth is still out there, waiting in the snow. Beyond the scientific hypotheses and historical records, there is another layer to the Dyatlov Pass Story 1 that lives in the quiet spaces between facts, in the dreams of those who study it, in the way certain photographs seem to hold more than just images. Take, for instance, the final campsite photo recovered from Krivonishenko's camera. 9 figures huddled around a fire, steam rising from their breath, faces lit by flame and laughter. It is an ordinary moment, yet it now carries the unbearable weight of foresight. We know what they do not, that this is the last time they will be together, warm, whole, unaware. That tension between what was and what would be is where the true haunting resides. The Soviet state, in its haste to contain the incident, failed to grasp this emotional gravity. To them, it was a logistical anomaly, a potential embarrassment, a file to be stamped and shelved. But to the families, to future generations of hikers, to anyone who has ever stood alone in a vast landscape and felt small, the Dyatlov tragedy is a meditation on fragility. These were not reckless thrill seekers. They were disciplined, methodical, and deeply connected to the natural world. Their gear was Soviet-made, but meticulously maintained. Their route was planned with military precision. They even carried spare film, extra batteries, and a first aid kit stocked with morphine. They prepared for everything, except the one thing that mattered. And what was that one thing? Perhaps it was simply the randomness of catastrophe. The universe does not negotiate with preparation. An avalanche doesn't check credentials. A freak wind doesn't consult maps. In that sense, Dyatlov Pass is not an outlier. It is a stark reminder of how thin the membrane is between order and chaos. Yet the incident also reveals the resilience of human curiosity. Despite decades of obfuscation, people kept digging. Archivists preserved documents others wanted destroyed. Journalists filed Freedom of Information requests long after the Cold War ended. In 2019, when the case was reopened, over 10,000 pages of testimony, sketches, and forensic reports were digitized and made public thanks largely to pressure from citizen researchers and the Dyatlov Foundation. This grassroots pursuit of truth against institutional inertia is itself a quiet triumph. Even the radiation traces, once fuel for alien theories, now have a more grounded explanation. Some researchers believe the hikers may have visited a closed nuclear city like Chelyabinsk 40 earlier in their trip, unknowingly carrying contaminated dust on their clothes. Others suggest the beta particles came from thorium-based lantern mantles, common in Soviet camping gear of the era. Neither theory fully accounts for the distribution of radiation, but both show how mystery can yield, slowly, to mundane causes. Still, the injuries resist easy categorization. In 2022, a biomechanics lab in Dresden recreated the chest trauma using cadavers and hydraulic presses. They found that only a very specific type of blunt force delivered rapidly over a wide surface area could cause internal fractures without skin damage. Such force is typical in high-speed car crashes, or in being struck by a dense, fast-moving slab of snow during a secondary avalanche event in a narrow gully. The ravine where the last four were found could have acted like a funnel, amplifying the impact. But then, why no snow debris on their bodies? Why no signs of burial? The answer may lie in the spring melt. By the time searchers reached the ravine in May, snow melt had washed away much of the evidence. The bodies were found in running water, suggesting they'd been moved by melt streams. In that chaos, context was lost. What remains undeniable is the courage of their final hours. The first five walked nearly 2 kilometers in sub-zero dark, some with bare feet, yet they gathered wood, tried to light a fire, and stayed together. That is not panic, it is discipline under duress. And the four in the ravine? Autopsy notes indicate they likely died later, meaning they survived the initial flight. Someone, perhaps Zolotaryov, the veteran, may have gone back for help, only to collapse in the gully. Dubinina's sweater was found wrapped around Krivonishenko's shoulders, suggesting they shared clothing until the end. This is the moral core of Dyatlov Pass. Not conspiracy, but compassion. Even in extremis, they cared for one another. Today, as climate change alters the Ural's melting permafrost, shifting snow lines, exposing long-buried artifacts, new clues may yet emerge. In 2023, a melting ice patch near the pass revealed a rusted canteen not listed in the original inventory. Was it theirs? Or from a later expedition? The question lingers, like so much else. But perhaps the greatest revelation is this: the truth may not be a single event, but a convergence. An unusual snow formation, a disorienting natural phenomenon, a moment of collective panic, and a series of tragic decisions made in seconds, all compounding into catastrophe. There may be no smoking gun, only a perfect storm of the improbable. And if that is the case, then the real lesson of Dyatlov Pass is humility. The humility to admit that even the best prepared can be undone by the unexpected. The humility to honor the dead not with sensationalism, but with remembrance. And the humility to accept that some mountains keep their secrets not out of malice, but because they were never meant to be fully known. The wind still blows across Kholat Shakhl. The cedars still stand. And somewhere in the snow, beneath layers of time and theory, 9 pairs of skis wait frozen, silent, pointing toward a horizon they never reached. In the years since, the Dyatlov Pass incident has transcended geography to become a global symbol of unresolved mystery. Not because it defies explanation, but because it resists singular interpretation. It is a Rorschach test in the snow. What you see depends on what you bring to it. To a physicist, it's a puzzle of forces and materials. To a historian, a case study in Cold War secrecy. To a poet, a lament for lost youth. And to a mountaineer, a sobering reminder that the mountains do not care how skilled you are. They only ask that you respect their silence. That silence, however, has been increasingly broken, not by answers, but by voices. In classrooms from Moscow to Melbourne, students debate the evidence. Online forums host engineers who simulate snow loads and meteorologists who model wind shear. Documentaries revisit the terrain with thermal drones and ground-penetrating radar. Each generation reinterprets the tragedy through its own lens, yet all return to the same haunting question: what would I have done in their place? The hikers themselves might have found the speculation both baffling and touching. They were not mystics or martyrs. They were students with exams to pass, jobs to start, lives to build. Igor Dyatlov planned to marry Zina Kolmogorova after graduation. Rustem Slobodin had just been accepted into a prestigious engineering program. Lyudmila Dubinina, only 20, dreamed of becoming a textile designer. Their ambitions were ordinary, their deaths extraordinary only in retrospect. And yet, in death, they achieved a kind of immortality not as individuals, but as a collective enigma. Their names are now etched into the lexicon of unsolved mysteries alongside the Mary Celeste and the Bermuda Triangle. But unlike those maritime legends, Dyatlov Pass is grounded in real soil, real snow, real paper trails. Every theory must contend with forensic reports, weather logs, and the unyielding physics of the human body in extreme cold. That tether to reality is what makes the mystery so potent. It happened. It is documented. And yet, it still eludes us. Even the language used to describe it carries weight. The Soviet phrase stikhijnaya sila, elemental force, or compelling natural force, was deliberately vague, almost poetic. It avoided blame, avoided mechanism, avoided accountability. In doing so, it created a vacuum that conspiracy would inevitably fill. But perhaps the phrase was more honest than it seemed. For what is an avalanche, an infrasound wave, a katabatic wind, if not a stikhijnaya sila, a force of nature, so sudden and overwhelming that it renders human agency irrelevant? In that light, the official conclusion may not have been a cover-up, but a surrender, a bureaucratic admission that some events lie beyond the reach of 1959 science, and maybe even beyond the reach of ours. Still, the pursuit continues. In 2025, a new expedition funded by a Swiss documentary team plans to core ice samples from the ravine, searching for microscopic traces of fabric, bone, or chemical residue that might reconstruct the final moments with forensic precision. They will use AI-powered pattern recognition to analyze decades of weather data, looking for anomalies in February 1959. And they will interview the last living witnesses now in their 90s who remember the search, the rumors, the hushed conversations in Sverdlovsk cafes. But even if they find a definitive cause, a rare snow slab, a military flare misfire, a freak lightning discharge in a dry storm, the mystery may not truly end. Because the deeper mystery is not how they died, but why it matters so much that we know. Perhaps it matters because their story mirrors our own existential unease. In an age of algorithms and satellites, we believe we have mapped the unknown. Yet Dyatlov Pass whispers otherwise, that just beyond the edge of our data, in the white spaces of our maps, reality can still surprise us. That control is an illusion, that sometimes the tent tears open from the inside and all we can do is step into the dark, barefoot, hoping for a fire that never lights. And so the mountain endures, not as a crime scene, not as a tourist attraction, but as a threshold, a place where the rational world meets the inexplicable, and where 9 young lives, frozen in time, continue to ask the only question that has ever mattered: what happened to us? The wind does not answer. It only carries their names: Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Dubinina, Kolovatov, Slobodin, Thibaut Brignol, Zolotaryov, Krivonishenko, Doroshenko, across the snow, into the sky, and into the long, quiet echo of history. For now, and perhaps forever, that is enough.